Hello and welcome to this webcast, which is titled Implementing AI, Practical Strategies to Achieve Scale and Mitigate Risks. It's brought to you by Argano with a guest speaker from IDC. I'm Ann Taylor, Director of Content Strategy with CIO Marketing Services, and I'll be the moderator for this discussion. Our experts will talk about some of the challenges surrounding the implementation of AI solutions, and they'll also offer strategies toward optimizing business value and enabling scalability. Let's meet our speakers. Kathy Lang is the Research Director of AI Software with IDC. She's focused on machine learning lifecycle tools and technologies, and her core research coverage includes, for example, machine learning lifecycle technologies, trends, end-user requirements, business models, and use cases, plus a great deal more. Kathy, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you. I'm very excited to be here.
Also joining us is Corey Bakhtiari. He is the Senior Director of Strategy and Innovation with Argano. It's a global digital consultancy that helps organizations transform their business operations for agility, profitability, growth, and improved customer experiences. Corey, welcome.
Thank you, Anne. Great to be here. Looking forward to this.
We have a great deal of information to share today. So let's get started with maybe an overview of the AI landscape. Kathy, there are various forms of artificial intelligence, machine learning, generative AI, agentic AI. Could you start maybe with some level setting for our discussion today?
Absolutely. AI is really everywhere. It's in our personal lives, it's in business, it's in every industry, it's in every business function. Everyone is doing something with generative AI. Nearly all organizations, since it's burst onto the scene about 2 years ago, many organizations have just exploded into working with generative AI. And it's really the new kid on the block because there was AI and it's been around for decades. Before generative AI, there was predictive AI. And predictive AI is really about running your business. Things like fraud detection, cross-sell, upsell from customers, recommendation engines. It's what organizations have been using for the past few decades. But then came along interpretive AI. And instead of using structured data, tables of rows and columns, interpretive AI was all about unstructured data and thinking about how do I look at images or text or audio. And I was trying to maybe categorize those things, like what are people talking about in reviews of my business? What are they looking at in images? Do people have safety wear on in those images? Do they have hard hats? Do they have safety goggles? When I'm looking at an image, is it an image of a person or a stop sign? So kind of categorizing and starting to use unstructured data with images and language and event data streams and video. But then came along generative AI. And generative AI is really about creation of new content from previously created content. So things like summarizing text or generating new images or new songs or generating marketing content. And so all of them kind of are working together. They're not mutually exclusive. They can be strung together, and they will be. That's what we're seeing from a future perspective. But the idea is really for organizations, their objective is to improve efficiency, increase their innovation, give better customer support, or employee productivity. So we asked a number of survey respondents about where their plans are to invest in these different kinds of AI. And here in the slide, you can see that we've asked them every 6 months. So the top bar is from August 2023. The middle bar in this bar chart on the right-hand side is from January 2024. And then the latest survey information is from July 2024. So here you can see that the top predictive AI is about the same, about 35%. Interpretive has kind of gone down a little bit, and then you see generative is growing at the bottom. And the takeaway here is that not generative AI is not the only tool in your toolbox. Really, there's still a lot of investment in the other types of AI, and predictive and interpretive still have a place. So only about 30% is going to be invested in generative AI.
It's really interesting how it's grown like that. So I'm curious, Kathy, what has IDC research shown in terms of the challenges that organizations are facing with AI adoption?
Well, there are a lot of challenges, really. Um, and some of them are consistent with traditional AI, and some of them are new. But talent and skills are the number one challenge that we hear from organizations, followed by AI governance, prioritizing the right use cases, and concerns about costs, and then measuring the ROI. So as I said, like AI skills and talent, I mean, that's a long-standing issue. It's an organizational issue. We don't have enough talent for all the demand for this. And then when we go to generative AI, it's all new, a very fast-moving technology, no best practices, evolving laws and policies. So that is really exacerbated from a skills and talent perspective. And when we think about governance, everybody's worried about security and risk and bad things happening, right? Inaccurate results causing harm to people or organizations, toxicity, control, loss of control of their data and intellectual property. Choosing the right use cases we'll talk more about. It's also been a long-standing problem with traditional AI as well. And then generative AI, of course, as you're training models and you're using expensive hardware with like GPUs, that is a big concern, especially because most of this is going to the cloud. And so it's been difficult to estimate what your costs are going to be, and they just go up and up and up as we introduce more of these applications. And then measuring ROI, that's also an issue because a lot of these POCs, that proof of concepts and experiments that they've been running, have not been successful. So only about 14% of the experiments that organizations have tried have made it to production. And the efficiency that they've been seeing is kind of spread out. So it's a little bit more difficult to measure that ROI. And one other area that I believe causes these challenges is because the tech stack and the landscape is so complex. So if I look at this middle layer that has kind of the automation across it, it starts with a generative foundation model, or some people would call it a large language model, an LLM. That's kind of the producing of the model themselves and kind of looking at the data challenges and tuning and adapting foundation models and then kind of putting them into production. And I kind of call that the meat of the sandwich. That's difficult in and of itself because there's so many people involved in there. But then when I look at all the other pieces to actually take an application to market, there's infrastructure at the bottom and there's the application at the top. And all in between there are so many pieces of the tech stack that are complicated, and they need to be orchestrated and put together seamlessly to deliver that AI application. So it's complicated, and as I said, there's not that many people who are experienced with this. So those are some of the big challenges that we're seeing.
Those are significant challenges. And Corey, I'm sure some of this sounds familiar with you. This is why Argano is in business. You're helping customers get over some of these challenges. Maybe without naming specific names, could you share some examples of the roadblocks that you're seeing organizations try to overcome?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, everything that Kathy has shared definitely resonates with our experience. We have customers that are in various stages of AI adoption, and roadblocks typically depend on where they are in that journey. Each one of those components could each be their own potential issue or roadblock for an eventual production like deployment of an AI solution. And some of this also requires being honest about an organization's own readiness. So one way I also kind of like to look at this is where they are in their adoption. Are they early in their adoption, into their adoption, or are they looking to get scale? And for those that are early in their adoption, sometimes we see paralysis. There is a split between the desire to adopt quickly for market competitiveness or fear of missing out, with a sense also that they must proceed with caution in a more deliberate manner. And this slide is an interesting example of how approaching an AI solution or an AI initiative could be overwhelming. What I would say is all organizations should acknowledge that this is something that we should all move on, because whether they like it or not, or you know it or not, AI is probably already being used in their organization in an informal capacity. Another component associated with paralysis is an organization doesn't know where to start. One of the things that I find pretty compelling to start is around education. Do we all know what we mean when we talk about AI? Which is why I appreciate Kathy breaking down concepts up front. It's really paramount, in my opinion. Knowledge in general helps dispel ambiguity. Ambiguity can lead to a lack of confidence and therefore a hesitation to act. Understanding the capabilities, what are they good for, how have other organizations used it, are all going to be tools in the toolbox for an organization when they get to the point that they're looking to adopt or start to deploy AI-based solutions. Use cases was mentioned as a challenge, and we see that often as well. What do we want to do to use generative AI? Specifically, roadblocks that we see are going to be around having too many use cases and having to prioritize, which we're going to go ahead and talk about. We've also seen situations where organizations need help ideating on use cases, surfacing or percolating the specific needs or requirements, goals, objectives, strategies, and capabilities. And this takes more of a business or management consulting approach. We've also seen a failure to launch in AI, just a way that we like to put it, but it could also be because of a lack of a clear strategy. Is the vision to improve personal productivity? Is it to improve the customer experience? Is it some combination, or are they flowing between the two of them? Is there leadership buy-in? Is this a departmental activity? How do these components impact an overall rollout of an AI capability? I would say when it comes to a strategy or a vision, it's important to be aspirational and think of the positive impacts when defining it, and not be so bogged down in the technology. Trust me, you're going to get to that. Additionally, governance and security concerns are big, from responsible AI to cybersecurity. I believe it's important to start, again, like many things, start small, start measure, start reasonable. A body to govern and implement AI controls. Let's take responsible AI, ethical, fair use, risk, compliance. Start with something simple. Start with that acceptable use policy. You can draw upon existing content that happens to be out there. It's relatively low stakes and is quite important because, as I said earlier, there is a high probability that there is some AI being used in your organization and you just don't know about it. Shadow AI. People are using ChatGPT individually for work purposes. If you don't have an acceptable use policy to outline what is appropriate, you are more exposed to risk. And that's a baseline. Data security comes to mind as well. We have organizations not sure whether their data was secured or classified correctly. They want to turn on AI on their own data, but they're concerned about data leak or unauthorized access. This includes proprietary, confidential, or PII data. So this requires us to do the needed. We want to honor data loss prevention or data sensitivity policies, or access control ones as well. And this is also where education becomes important. There are different layers of control, as this slide speaks to. Things like filters for content moderation, transparency to identify data sources, prompt shielding to prevent prompt injections, and continuous evaluation to accommodate for changes of drift. Also, of course, human in the loop to validate outputs. There are also a variety of different industry standards continually evolving, from ISO and NIST, as well as regulatory or state actors to develop guidelines. And it's nice. I do see a very serious focus on this, which is providing some sense of hope that we will get this governance and security component right. And that's typically, early in the life cycle, middle in the life cycle. We see stalling initiatives, and that is associated with not making progress because of a lack of skills, not having a dedicated team, even if there are skills, or not having the investment, leading to half-baked solutions. We also see infrastructure readiness. Integration with legacy systems that are not cloud native or AI enabled will limit the ability to deploy or maximize AI. We know the old adage of garbage in, garbage out. Data quality is also a big roadblock. Use of AI is going to be dependent on being trained on data, right? What's the state of the data? Is it clean? Is it not clean? Is it structured? Is it unstructured? If it's structured, is it normalized, or is there an analytics or semantic friendly data warehouse in place? These are all components that all contribute to the actual implementation or the build cycle. And furthermore, we've also got what AI solutions are appropriate. Are you looking at off-the-shelf options, or maybe looking at building out a custom AI solution? Commonly, a low-risk option can be to deploy an off-the-shelf AI in one of maybe their core IT service applications, maybe a business application, but you still need to do your due diligence. And then if you want to ground AI in your data, like for example, for retrieval augmented generation, again, challenges include that infrastructure readiness, data quality, how do you achieve desired accuracy, precision, or creativity benchmarks, and there are a variety of different data science methodologies to accommodate that. Lastly, when we're looking at later stages of an AI journey, it's the scale, right? Piloting is pretty normal approach to deploying AI, and it's a good one. It can limit risk and investment while hopefully identifying a return or ROI. But with scale comes cost, and that needs to be assessed against the value provided. And then lastly is the change management. There's always resistance to change. It's important to get buy-in and have change champions, and to also manage unrealistic expectations. We tend to hear a lot in the media about the promise or the fear around AI. And if individuals are involved in pilots or educated on a specific set of capabilities like we're talking about right now, the less likely they are to have those misaligned expectations.
Yeah, Corey, you mentioned something about getting started, and I think that's really important. What we're seeing in our research is that organizations are getting started using Gen AI with those off-the-shelf types of products that have embedded AI, like a Salesforce or a ServiceNow, or they're using just APIs with, let's say, a GPT or a Chat GPT or any of the Gemini and Perplexity and things like that. But what we're seeing kind of coming up in our research is over the next 24 months, they'll move to more complex applications, more advanced workloads. And some of those advanced workloads that kind of you touched on also are really kind of productionizing and scaling those workloads, because a proof of concept might be very small and not have a lot of traffic through it. But once it goes to production, you could have hundreds of thousands of people using your application, depending on the size of your organization. And scaling that really needs to be looked at across the whole stack, the infrastructure, the software, and kind of optimized for that. And that's coming. as more and more organizations really put these applications into production, we're going to see a focus on optimizing the inferencing costs, the deployment costs, and making sure that you've got the right hardware and the right software, and you've got lower latency, and you're reducing your costs, maybe smaller models being put into production because they're less costly, and optimizing which calls go to what model and things like that. So we're going to really start seeing that. And then what's happening in the future is agentic AI. That's the next topic on the table, right? Is how do we use an LLM-based application to actually reason and call tools and act autonomously on its own to drive. In the beginning, it'll be human in the loop, right? But eventually to drive autonomous actions through these applications. And we'll also see chaining of generative AI with predictive AI and possibly interpretive AI and business rules, all in this stack to get to the applications. They'll become much more complicated than they are today.
Absolutely, absolutely. The pace of change is astounding, and it's just going to keep increasing. This is where having some level of investment and dedicated folks are partnering with organizations that specialize in this area is going to become really important. Architectural changes are going to be presenting also real nice ways to optimize, like you said, certain use cases for larger scale deployments, not having to run, on less memory, or, like you said, using smaller language models. A lot of options are going to be coming up, and it's important that organizations also learn to shift and adapt and change based on these new coming capabilities.
A lot of good considerations there and challenges, but let's level set with that use case that each of you brought up, and it's critical for success because, Kathy, you mentioned that 14%, I think, of proof of concepts don't get into production. So maybe part of that is the use case. It's critical. You need to deliver business value. Kathy, when we were prepping for this, you showed us a chart with all the different use cases for generative AI. I'm wondering if you could show that and talk us through it.
Absolutely. So, up front, I mentioned that every organization is investing in generative AI and across the functions within the enterprise. And here you really see the 13 functions across the enterprise. And what IDC has put together is this use case taxonomy, and it helps people think about where the most opportunity is in their organization. For instance, here you see customer service as one of the areas, the functional areas. And if I drill down on customer service, I might go into the contact center. And the contact center has several use cases underneath that, like real-time interaction summarization or workforce optimization. And so for each one of these, we've got a listing of what that use case is all about and how risky it might be. But the idea is that at least you can see them within your organization. You really need to prioritize where your value and your risk are going to come from, right? And we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. But you need to kind of look at where these all are, and let's think about not using just a technology for the sake of technology. Where in your organization could this be most helpful? And right now what we see is that HR is one of the biggest areas of opportunity in the surveys that we've seen. So HR, also in finance and customer service, they are the biggest opportunities today. But all of these areas are going to be increasing. What we see from investments in the next 12 months is they will all be on the rise, and you'll see each one of these kind of taking off. But it's really very specific to your organization, and you really have to kind of think through the risk and the value of each one of these.
I really like this slide. It really speaks to the breadth of use cases or application of AI. I mean, and it's across the whole organization, right? I, what's interesting too is like it does seem where maybe the initial efforts might be spent around deploying generative AI, maybe where those data sources are going to be in a natural language format primarily initially. But what's interesting too is just based on how the architecture of generative AI, like with transformers, how suitable that is to also other use cases as well, whether it's more structured data training and even to healthcare oriented activities. It's really impressive to see just the breadth of capability that we're going to be understanding and learning about in the next few years that generative AI has enabled. And yeah, it is interesting. You're going to be seeing a lot associated with those activities like legal as well, where there's a lot of natural language capabilities, those like that are in marketing and customer service, where you're working and you're interacting in that format.
And I would also be remiss to say that these are functional use cases, but there are also industry-specific use cases that IDC has identified as well. So right now you're just seeing kind of the functional use case taxonomy.
Well, considering that breadth of capabilities and opportunities for use cases, let's offer some guidance in terms of prioritizing these use cases. Kathy, could you start off with some advice or guidance there? What does IDC suggest? And then Corey, please jump in.
So in this slide, you kind of see how we're thinking about use case prioritization, the feasibility versus the business value. And you really have to think about where you want to start. And here you see kind of the low priority, the quick wins, high priority, and big bets. And they all have different types of feasibility and business value requirements. But I really think you need to think about value versus risk. So value could be economic value, it could be sustainability, it could be customer experience, it could be saving lives. But the risks, there's a lot of risks as well. So, financial, operational, competitive risks, and you have to think about for each one of these use cases, you have to prioritize whether they're achievable in an acceptable amount of time. Do you have the resources that you need, people resources, but also do you have the data? Do you have the subject matter experts? Do you have the technical implementation folks? My advice actually would be to kind of go with the quick wins. It's a high feasibility and, not as maybe as much business value, but what you need to do is really build support with your stakeholders as you get success with one use case, moving on to the next use case and getting the support that you need and the funding that you need probably internally within the organization as well. Corey, what would you think?
No, I would agree. Quick wins generate interest, motivate individuals to contribute, get some I call it points on the board, right? Always help with a change management approach. And it also allows an organization to, figure things out. They're going to, like with anything that's new, you're going to be running into challenges that you maybe not had anticipated. Any amount of planning, any large amount of planning, are really just good enough until, like the saying is, until you get hit in the face, right? And you're going to need to iterate and you're going to change and you're going to accommodate and build your own methodology. So I do think quick wins are good because you get points on the board, but it allows you to go through the full deployment life cycle, certainly. And we see use cases that are range quite multimodal from an AI perspective, like using computer vision. Okay, now we're going to incorporate some predictive analytics. And then at the end, there's going to be a chat interface or some generative AI capability. And those would, yes, there might be components of it, but it's important to probably break them down like in an agile capacity. Like maybe there are actually user stories or individual components that we can build out that will then each have their own value to an organization. Another thing I would also include in the value component is an understanding of, is this a broad or is this a narrow use case? Because depending on an organization, one might be better than the other, right? If you've got a broad use case, you may want to approach a broad use case where there's more applicable use or utility across different lines of business or different business units. And that's really useful when there's like a competition for AI resources. You've got a lot of people raising their hands, wanting to deploy AI. Maybe it's important to go wide instead of deep. However, if you're seeing a lot of hesitation or resistance, might be more important value wise, maybe, or just change management wise to start narrow and go deep as well.
Yeah, I think that's a great suggestion. We always recommend kind of a crawl, walk, run kind of environment. So get your feet on the ground first, crawl, and then you can get more complicated as you move along. But you really have to get that stable footing first.
Yeah. On the feasibility side, also, like, what is this, an internal or an external use cases? They each present their risk, as you said, Kathy, their own risk profiles, right? Associated with that, what sort of data is important. I think, when it comes to that, identifying upfront very quickly, hopefully, if there is some way to automate that, maybe the risk profile of an organization of a use case, that can help understand or basically peg where or measure the feasibility component as well, because it may seem technically like a simple use case. However, if there's a large amount of compliance associated with it based on the data being used or the individuals that are going to be interacting with it, that also scales that feasibility measure as well.
And I know your organization helps customers do that all the time, kind of look at all these dimensions and help to focus the client on where to go. We also have a service that helps to direct people into one of these areas to help them figure out what the right use case prioritization is.
And Kathy, how do you see value? I've got some thoughts or some questions on this, and this maybe speaks to also an ROI. And I don't know, would you consider when you're evaluating ROI, is there any specific difference or changes or anything that additionally you may want to take into consideration when you're looking at evaluating AI-based ROI versus maybe another kind of business initiative? Or would you say that they're pretty similar?
I just think that there's a lot of uncertainty with AI, and so you really have to drill down and think about, do I have the right resources when I'm thinking about this? Do I have the right data? Do I have access to the right data? Is like the very basic level, right? Do I have access to that data? Is it clean? Is it quality? Do I have the right resources? If I don't have the right resources in house, I need to pick a partner that is going to help me along, that has experience and that can bolster the capabilities that I have internally. So I think there's just some similarities and then some differences, but AI is has a lot of uncertainty with it.
Absolutely. And I mean, there's a dimension as well of like leveraging generative AI for creative applications. I found myself when I was first using generative AI, like for maybe drafting something like a creative pursuit, like maybe I wanted to do a podcast or something like that. I found myself using it to help with like drafting, like a second draft or third draft. And what I was thinking about, and I've read a little bit about this as well, but I don't know that I was actually necessarily working smarter or more efficiently. I think to a certain extent, I was almost taking the same amount of time, but I was relying on AI more. And what I was doing was I was almost starting from scratch every iteration of a creative endeavor. And eventually, I think that was because I had not learned how to work effectively with AI in some cases. So when you're looking at the value, when you're looking at the ROI, I do think also it is difficult because, right, there could be a lot of different contributing factors that might actually inform what that looks like. And as long as you understand the directionality of it and you incorporate some level of training, I think, you should be able to hopefully peg some components of it. But yeah, I would agree. There is certainly a lot of uncertainty and a lot of variables underneath the mix that need to be sussed out.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground today. The AI trends, the considerations, the challenges, the use cases. We even got into a bit of the value conversation. So before we wrap up, I'm wondering if you could each share a closing thought, a key takeaway, maybe a next step, because I think our viewers come to us looking for, where do I even start? So maybe that's the next step. But Kathy, could you kick us off there, and then Corey, add your thoughts?
Sure. So, as we were just talking about, prioritizing the use cases are really important. But at the core of it all, it's about data. So, it's not necessarily about the models themselves, but the models require the data. So I would focus on data quality and data security. Those are be my top bets. And then I would make sure that I'm investing in AI skills within my organization, building them up, but also looking for a partner to help build the skills within the organization and bring these use cases to life. And Corey mentioned change management, and I really think that that is very important. When we look at our surveys, we see that executives are looking at all the wonderful value coming out of these applications, and employees are thinking about, oh my gosh, what about layoffs and losing my job? So there's a big gap between the executives and the employees, and that really needs to be addressed through change management.
I would agree. Yeah, those are all very good points. A couple things I would maybe add on top of that are, yeah, like we've said, get started and demystify AI. This sense of otherness that tends to come with new technologies, it could be a hindrance really to an adoption, right? Educate, regularize it. That is going to be very important to pilot, to scale, and move forward from there. Demystifying AI, I think, is probably one thing I would certainly recommend, highly recommend. I'm a big fan of endowing responsibility to like govern and control and balance that with innovation. Some things I've seen that have worked well are going to be around centralizing the responsibility to govern and implement controls, develop automations to help improve efficiency around those pieces with those system controls, but then allow for some decentralization around ideation, maybe even build and use to get the most out of the promise of AI. And lastly, I do believe all organizations are going to be AI organizations, just like every company has IT to support its business. Eventually, every company is going to have AI across its different business functions to support that business. And I see that pervasiveness being pretty fundamental to the understanding of where we will be going with AI. And I think it's important that we get ahead and we start moving towards it, and just know it's a journey. You're not going to be done just because you've implemented a co-pilot or another solution. You are going to have to continue to monitor it, govern it, and hopefully deploy it.
Well, this has been a great conversation. Thanks so much to our speakers, including our guest from IDC, Kathy Lang, and Corey Bakhtiari from Argano. And thanks to our viewers for watching. Before you go, please be sure to take a few moments to check out the additional information that we've uploaded into the console, into the resources section of the console. And on behalf of Argano and CIO, I'm Ann Taylor saying thanks so much for watching.